And but we're gonna be talking about Tupac today. So before we can even get anywhere close to Tupac, we got to just kind of set the ambience, set the tone and the stage for it. So let's just jam a couple of Tupac just to get the morning started or whatnot. And we'll be back with the legendary Dr. Jeffrey Ogbar right here on the Motivational Jumpstart.
No changes. Wake up in the morning and I ask myself.
All right. Welcome back to the Motivational Jumpstart on 91.7 FM. That's a couple jams to start your morning off the right way. The legendary Tupac Shakur. Everybody knows that the movie All Eyes on Me is in theaters right now. And hopefully we have a historian on the line right now that could educate the people best the way that he does. Is Dr. Jeffrey Ogbar on the line?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Ogbar. How you doing, good sir?
Hey, I'm doing very well. A little sad day for hip hop, R.I.P. Prodigy.
Definitely R.I.P. Prodigy for sure. That's crazy. That is crazy. First, so before we get into it, I know all is well in your world. You're busy. To the listeners out there, this is the third interaction to the show with Dr. Ogbar. So we definitely appreciate you for showing love to the show, Dr. Ogbar. For sure. But just to start it off, definitely a sad day for hip hop. Prodigy, what did Prodigy mean to you? And just speak a little bit about that, because you actually got to meet the brother, right?
Yeah, he was one half of the group Mobb Deep, which was a classic hip hop group coming out of New York City, Queensbridge, in the 1990s, and they have a number of songs. Their most famous song is Shook Ones Part 2, which is the beat, I argue, is one of the best beats in hip hop. It has to be like top 10, most ominous, sort of like subtle, strong, grimy, real powerful song. And he actually came to the University of Connecticut back when he came out of prison in 2011 off of a weapons charge, a 3-year stint for a weapons charge. And he just released his autobiography, My Infamous Life. And it was a really remarkable book about his own shortcomings, his failures, his strengths, his family, which is he has an incredibly rich family history, including a founder of my alma mater, Morehouse College. His mother and his grandmother was a professional dancer. She had a dance studio in New York City. And, he just has a fascinating family history. So he came to terms with his own shortcomings. He had a beef with Tupac. He had a beef with Jay-Z, very famous beefs with those two titans of the industry, but Mobb Deep was a remarkable group, and it's a big loss for hip hop.
Wow. That's a lot of history right there, man. So it's definitely a sad day, for hip hop in that regard. So definitely to all the Prodigy fans out there, R.I.P. Prodigy. Hopefully hip hop can continue to swing itself into, a positive direction. But I've definitely been seeing from social media all of the trends, people paying their respects, and I think that's a beautiful thing. But go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to just quickly say that a lot we think of Prodigy from his earlier work, where he certainly talked about a lot of thug stuff, a lot of grimy stuff, a lot of street stuff. But Prodigy, just to remember that, just like people have been saying for many years, there are folks who play gangsters in movies, like Al Pacino and De Niro have played many gangsters over the years, and they have private lives outside of their artistic circles that are very different. And this is how Prodigy was. He actually was a father, he was a husband, he was a dutiful family man, and he also wrote about health, and he was into healthy eating. He was an advocate for healthy living, also mitigating violence in black communities. So he actually, in a personal way, made a significant turn in his last years, and I think we should make note of that as well.
Right. Definitely. And I feel like a lot of people don't know that or haven't heard that side of it, especially people who might not be on the East Coast, New Yorkers or whatnot. So definitely, that's definitely a beautiful gem to throw out there for sure, Dr. Ogbar. So as it relates to Tupac, right? So shifting gear, to Tupac, definitely have a lot of listeners across the country chiming in for this. just your initial thoughts. I know you just wrote your piece, in the conversation, talking about, Tupac, his life, his struggles, his triumphs, what he really meant to the generation. But just starting off, what did Tupac Shakur, like, what did he personally mean to you? And then when did you really, truly become a fan? Knowing that you're a hip hop historian, but what did Tupac mean to you? And then when did you truly become a fan?
Well, so I don't tell the story. In fact, as you know, I teach a class on hip hop. I've done it since '99, 2000 academic year. So it's a very old class, and most of my students don't know this. It's not because I met so many hip hop luminaries over the years, and I don't get to most of them. In fact, I don't talk about almost any interaction I've had with these folks, from simple things like meeting Nas in a quick meeting or having a dinner with Common. I really haven't talked about those to like my classes. It's not because it's a secret, but I guess on some level don't want to look like I'm trying to seem fancier than I am, because I'm not fancy. And I don't. None of these guys probably remember any interaction they've ever had with me anyway, right? So it's not really significant. But I did meet Tupac, and this is something that probably no student, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this in any of my classes, but when I was in college, I think my junior year, or maybe it was my senior year, I forget, in 1991, maybe it was my I forget. Anyway, at some point in college, my junior, senior year, we had a few friends of mine had organized a rally to commemorate Malcolm X's, the 25th anniversary of Malcolm X's assassination. And there it was, February, and I guess it was 1991, and we all got together, or 1990, we all got together, and we had some folks from the community come out, including this guy from a group called the New African Panthers, which was a youth wing of a black nationalist organization called the New African People's Organization. And this young man, I was actually president of the History Majors Club in a little radical on campus, and I was supposed to speak, so I was kind of on the steps where everything was going on. But because the program went long, I never got a chance to talk, but I was up there. So this young man got up and he, spit some rhymes. Of course, this is Tupac. And so when he spit his rhymes, at the time, his album wasn't out, but I remember he had some really fiery political lines. And he and I are separated by only 2 years. I'm 2 years older than Pac. But when you're like 20 and this guy's 18, and I'm like this, in some ways like an old head radical type of dude, he really appreciated the love we gave him. So I dapped him up and told him, I said, man, yo, brother, keep up the good work. It sounds hot. And he's like, yeah, look for my album coming out next year. It's going to be fire. And so, whatever word we used back then is going to be dope. And so my man Pac, the album ended up coming out a year after that. So it wasn't the 91 album came out, but it was following, I think it was 92 when his album dropped. It was Tupacalypse Now. But I remember eagerly, when I first heard Tupac spit rhymes that day on the steps at Morehouse College, I remember thinking, I can't wait to hear this guy's album, right? So that was the very first introduction. And I remember the album didn't come out. And when it came out, to be honest, hip-hop had become much more radical and much more sort of black nationalist than what Tupacalypse Now was. I remember liking it, but I wasn't blown away by it. I was slightly disappointed that he wasn't more radical. Right, and that's how. To be honest, I know it sounds sad saying it now. It might hurt people's feelings, but I was thinking that I wanted a little bit more. But that was the only time I met Pac. I never met him again. I know a number of people have, but I have always admired his music, and I struggled over it because he had a lot of contradictions. And there were times when I was greatly disappointed with Pac because I knew that he was much brighter and much more talented and much more politically engaged than I think his music sometimes reflected. And he struggled also with his contradictions, and you see it in his lyrics in numbers of songs. But Tupac was just an indelible, just dynamic, colorful figure, man. You just can't get away from how significant and engaging Pac was.
Right. So just from that moment, Dr. Ogbar, so you're doing your thing, president of the History Club, supposed to speak. You have this guy, comes up, this young hot spitter, right, Tupac. But at that moment, knowing that, wow, this guy has some dope lyrics. At that moment, did you know just within that interaction, because, just in the day, especially at black colleges, etc., people passing out mixtapes or people, I have the
Right.
new hit CD. But did you know, like, yo, this guy, Tupac, or this guy is literally about to, in a sense, revolutionize the world, and he's about to become like an it factor. Did you see that on the steps at that moment, or you was like, nah, this is a dope guy who has a lot of potential? Like, what was that feeling like? Like, no, I know this guy is going to be on everybody's TV, on movie screens, etc.
Well, I wish I could say, oh man, when Pac got up, I knew this guy was gonna do something fancy. I knew he was gonna make an indelible imprint in hip hop. I knew he was gonna transform. I wish I could say that, but I can't. There are people who say that when they met a younger Barack Obama, they always knew he was going places. There are people who say that, but I can't say that when I met Pac, I was gonna think that he was gonna be that significant. At the time, you're right. There were a lot of people who were hustling tapes, but I don't remember a lot of that going on in the early, like, this is 1990, so I don't remember a whole bunch of that. I do remember seeing that later, but when Pac came up, I remember thinking I loved the militancy that came out, because hip hop was party music up until around 88. You started to have Public Enemy with, they came out with It Takes a Nation of Millions, and then slowly, between 88 and 1990, in the early 90s, hip-hop became increasingly politically engaged and more resistive, and what I call a Black Power reprise in that moment. And Pac was on the precipice of that. He was just, in that point, X-Clan had not come out, and X-Clan came out in the summer of 1990, like later that spring, and X-Clan was like super black, right? And Ice Cube at that time was just breaking away from NWA, so he hadn't come out with America's Most Wanted yet, So what you really had in terms of like conscious music, you had Public Enemy, Brand Nubian was just about to come out. So Pac actually, to hear his rhymes in the early 1990s, is to really hear someone who was on the cutting edge of some really good progressive, radical black stuff. And that wasn't that common. But by the time he actually came out with his album, the art form itself had pushed itself past where he was in early 1990 in some respects. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so, but Pac, but also Pac came out, when he came out in 92, you got to keep in mind that The Chronic came out in 92, Snoop Dogg was coming out in 93. You had a lot of the Dog Pound, a lot of these West Coast gangster rappers were coming out. And so they weren't talking about, freeing the people. They weren't talking about black liberation. They weren't talking about white supremacy. They weren't talking about, the Black Panther Party. So when gangster rappers came out, they were, at the moment when Pac was coming out, you had gangster rappers that were really starting to become more dominant in hip hop, while the black nationalist radical cats were becoming, they were still there, but not, they were actually competing for space in the charts. And I think Pac really reflects that period, that what I call a brackish, between saltwater and freshwater, brackish water.
Uh-huh.
So he was right at that period. He kind of balanced those two sensibilities, And it wasn't straight up like, gangster rap a la and the misogyny you might find with Too Short or with NWA after Ice Cube, but it wasn't quite X-Clan or Public Enemy either.
Interesting. Okay. So I know you mentioned a little bit, and guilty enough, being from Louisiana, as you know, we got a lot of the mainstream things, but you being from California, you being a historian, etc., knowing just the litmus, you kind of mentioned a little bit over the years, just kind of some of the contradictions within Pac. Like, how difficult, as someone who knows that, with his mom, Afeni Shakur, and him being this almost in a sense, I know it speaks to the time and the culture, right, of everything that was happening in the world at that time, and him being, born and raised, etc. But speak a little bit, Dr. Ogbar, just seeing the impact, with his mom being a part of the Black Panthers, etc., and then him having the promise to literally just, I guess, essentially, be a strictly conscious rapper. But at certain points in his music, it might have been contradictions that you mentioned that he kind of struggled with himself. So speak about, just a little bit about the impact of someone being raised by his mom in that Black Panther type of world environment, consciousness, and then just the contradictions of some of his music.
Yeah. So to put this in some context, if you look at Tupac, in 1969, his mother was arrested with 20 other Panthers in an infamous case known as the Panther 21 case.
Uh-huh.
In the Panther 21 case, 21 Panthers in New York City were charged with conspiracy to blow up buildings in New York City.
Right.
And it was a trumped-up charge. A year before they were arrested, J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI, called the Black Panther Party the greatest threat to national security in the United States. And so the FBI had a very daunting campaign to destroy, undermine, disrupt the Black Panther Party. And this was a product of that effort. The 21 Panthers were acquitted. So they had 156 charges. They were all eventually acquitted of those charges. And Afeni, Tupac's mother, she was acquitted a month before Tupac was born. So there was a possibility that she would have actually given birth to Tupac in prison. So at his very birth, I mean, he's dealing with external forces that were set in play to fundamentally just, destroy his family, right? His community. And the Panther Party, here they are. They're fighting for the liberation of Black people. They're pushing against police terror in Black communities, poverty, drug addiction. They're dealing with sweeping corruption throughout Black communities that are I could go on and on about that. So the Panther Party kind of comes out this moment of pushing for Black people's freedom, and the federal government unleashes all this. But check this out, Mike. The day after Tupac was born, Richard Nixon, President of the United States, issues a statement. It has nothing to do with Tupac in particular, right? But obviously, he's a little baby. He doesn't know anything about Tupac, but he issues a statement saying that he wants more money from the federal government to ultimately lead a war on drugs, right? So this is the day after Tupac's birth, and then he has a press conference. And so one of the things that's interesting here is that Nixon calls drugs the number one threat to the United States. So 2 years earlier, or a few years earlier, J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI, said that the Black Panther Party is the number one threat. Now we have Nixon saying the number one threat. And they end up creating, as a consequence, the largest prison industrial complex the world has ever known, right? So ultimately, from 1973 up, we've had over 15 million people arrested just for marijuana possession, right? And I ask my students at UConn every year, like I ask them, not every, but last few years, how many people here know UConn students that smoke weed? I'm not saying y'all necessarily, but somebody I've had one student who lived off campus, who was married, an older student, who did not know. But everyone knows a student at UConn who smokes weed. But those students at UConn, I don't think they should be arrested. But students at UConn don't have to worry about being put in prison for weed possession, right?
Right.
But literally 15 million people have been sucked up into the criminal justice system because of criminalization of weed in particular, marijuana, but other drugs too. So one of the things we got to think of is that Tupac's the so-called war on drugs, although Black and white Americans consume drugs at similar rates, meaning that majority of drug users are white because the majority of the country is white, and the percentage of Black users is in proportion to their population, right? The overwhelming majority of people who spend time in prison for drug use have been Black people and other people of color. And so Black people are more likely to be arrested, more likely to be convicted, and more likely to be sentenced for drugs than white people are, although they use drugs at the same rates. And Tupac's mother, and when it comes to addiction rates, the addiction goes across racial lines and class lines, but his mother, unfortunately, became an addict. And I'm not going to blame that on Nixon, but, and Tupac was well aware that his mother was kind of sucked up into the system that had every intention to destroy the most vulnerable communities in the United States. And that was a challenge for him. And we talk about the contradictions, at one point, even Tupac sold drugs, which seems ironic in that, he sees how destructive the drug trade can be, and in particular, the deaths and the mass incarceration experience of Black communities. But here he was, at one point, so desperate out of poverty that he found drug selling to be an option, a viable option. So he did that for a short period of time before he was actually got picked up as a roadie for Digital Underground, rap group out of the Bay Area.
Interesting. So being on this system, right, it's inescapable, right, Dr. Ogbar? So it's inescapable. So even someone who saw the damage that was doing, was bred into a community of understanding, right, the lessons that his mom Afeni was teaching him, etc. He still, unfortunately, fell victim to circumstances due to the systemic nature of was happening, in the world, at the time. So,
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that we have options, although some options look way more attractive than other options, right? And I think that Tupac could have made other choices, but clearly, if he were raised in a middle class household where he didn't struggle to eat, selling drugs would have been much less an option, right?
for sure.
And so there's no way you get around that. And here he was, uh, no fault of his own. He was in a situation where his biological father didn't know how to contact him because his mother was off the grid, right? And they didn't have regular contact, so he didn't have a biological father in his life. His stepfather was arrested by the federal government. His mother fell victim to drug usage, and literally they didn't have food to eat. And then if you're under 16 years old, you can't get a work permit, right? So at this point, you have a guy who legitimately, no matter what he wants, he cannot fulfill basic necessities for his household legally. Because
Wow.
even if he worked, it would be it'd be violation of child labor laws. At 15 years old. And so the drug selling became an option for him, which clearly was not an ideal one. But this is the situation.
Wow. So all of this happens. He gets picked up. Um, so now he's he's really hardcore. Despite all of that, now he gets picked up, right? Digital Underground, and now Tupac begins to morph into this artist. Pen to paper. He's expressing his feelings like most artists does. At that time, once Tupac came out with his album, and you heard the first album, etc., what was your impressions of this guy Tupac now, based on all of that?
It's funny, man, because I remember when.
All right, welcome back, Dr. Ogbar. Are you there?
Yes, sir.
Oh, Ray, I don't know what happened. Technology. It might have been the federal government hearing you dropping these jewels, man. We got disconnected, man. I don't know what happened. You see, when you start speaking the truth and letting people know about the historical references or whatnot. So, to the listeners,
they start getting mad.
They start getting mad. So I apologize to the listeners out there. So the question that I did ask before we got mysteriously disconnected was, so once Tupac got signed, Digital Underground, and then his music came out, you started talking about the first album. So if you kind of could retract your thoughts a little bit, you were saying, once the first album came out, and you always remembered him from when you met him that one time, and you was talking about just your impressions on the first album.
Yeah. I was just saying that when he spoke at Morehouse that time and spit rhymes, he had a line about Statue of Liberty, and he made reference. He said the Statue of Liberty lied to him, and I remember that he used the B word, and when he made reference to Statue of Liberty, and when the album came out, that I remember that song, and that's the song he actually spit at that Malcolm X rally in 1990. And so he had some songs that he had circulated for at least a couple years before the album came out. So I genuinely liked the album. I was not as impressed. I thought that he could have been, even because hip-hop itself had become even more militant and more radical, I kind of expected a little bit more, but I liked the album. It wasn't like X Plans to the East Blackwards, which I played in the ground. It wasn't Death Certificate, which I played in the ground. It wasn't Takes a Nation of Millions I played in the ground, but I genuinely liked the album. The album, as you may know, although Pac is so celebrated and is one of the most successful rappers of all time, I think he's only after Eminem and selling more albums than any rapper ever. And so you talk about the second most successful MC in the history of music. But this guy was, with his first album, didn't even go platinum. It barely sold albums. Barely went gold. And it went gold after years. I think it took something like 4 years before it went platinum. So it actually wasn't a commercial success, but it certainly helped set his career. And then the subsequent songs, I was telling a story about how a lot of the stuff I like about Pac isn't always the militant, hard, black nationalist type of hip hop. And one of my favorite songs, like Hail Mary, is one of my favorite songs. I love California Love, and I was just telling a story about how 2009 I was in Greece and Mykonos, this island in Greece, and I was hanging out one night, and I was there for a conference, and I took a trip over to Mykonos, and it was a beautiful island. It was like this Paradise, and I'm walking along the way, and I hear from this club, California Love. The beat is banging, man. And so I'll go over to the club, and I'm drawn to the club like a moth to a flame. I dart over to the club. I get there, and I'm trying to walk through the door, and this bouncer, I thought the dude was trying to come out as I was trying to come in. I turned to the left, he turned to the left. I turned to the right, he turned to the right. And I decided to step aside to let him walk out, and then he was like, no, I'm the bouncer. And he was not trying to let me in the club, and California Love was playing. So I told him, I said, hey, man, I'm from California, my man Pac. I love this song, and you got to let me in. And he laughed, dapped me up, and let me in the club, man. And it was so much fun, but I remember thinking how much that song resonated with me always. Years later, I was still, with banging that song. So anyway, I'm a huge fan of Pac, man, but I'm not, and I'm not someone who's selective to only one type of his music. I do get into stuff that's not always about, politics and social justice, although I do like those songs.
Interesting. So within that contradiction for yourself, and then you've talked about this, right? That the artist put out the song. I think it's one of your quotes from one of the previous shows. The artist put out the song. The people listen to the music. They decide on the music. So when you look at Pac from I guess a holistic perspective, knowing that life got cut short, and that he did have these competing thoughts, within his music, and knowing that the way you listen is, to your point, it's not just necessarily just about, black liberation or social justice. You have your party music, you have all of these different things that you subscribe to, what are those things that to people, like, I'll be honest, so like myself, to the listeners out there, like myself, which is from a fandom perspective, people can definitely, admire Pac. But people who might have not necessarily been so consumed within the culture of Pac and might have, listened to, one of his CDs or was on a road trip and was driving, and then they heard all of these things about Pac, and then, might have heard competing tracks that were like, oh, wow, in this track, Dear Mama, in this track, wow, he's kind of going in on the culture. What would you say to those individuals to kind of keep a balanced ideology about Pac, being that he was this complex individual who was born in these time and was making, trying to make meaning of what life was based on his circumstances?
Well, so how people might be able to appreciate Tupac beyond
maybe some of the misogyny, but then also some of the, the more profound lyrics, Black of the Berry, all of that. Like, how could people find balance or appreciate him more when they might say, oh, wow, he might be this very, contradicting individual who people might have said that, he's on the Mount Rushmore because he was all about the people. But in some of the lyrics, he might have not been about the people, or
Yeah.
So what would you say to those individuals?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's healthy for us to understand that just like regular people that we see every day in our own households, and we look in the mirror, we're not perfect, and we're
right.
full of contradictions. I mean, all of us are flawed. All of us are imperfect. All of us contradict ourselves. All of us make mistakes. And we like to think of ourselves as fundamentally good people. And even people that we look and see as bad people think of themselves as good people, fundamentally, even if they make mistakes, right? And so to understand Tupac is to understand his humanity and his complexity and his contradiction. And the thing is, this is not unique among folks. I mean, and on some level, he thought of himself as an MC who had a particular integrity when it came to making music that he felt comfortable with. Yet, he also understood market demands, and when Death Row came to him in 1995 and said, and here's a guy who is in prison, man, and, he could have been exposed to all sorts of abuse that we don't know about. But here's a guy who had his freedom snatched away. He's in prison, and he could not get out. Suge Knight's the guy that brought him out. Death Row Records, as we all know, had never been known for talking about freeing anybody, ever, right? So they weren't talking about any of this stuff that Pac might have felt, passionate about. He got signed to Death Row Records, and Death Row Records was his saving grace. I mean, it looked like he got more money, more support, more market appeal. He got everything once he signed to Death Row Records. And for him, I think he felt that he had to make certain artistic compromises when he's rapping with Dr. Dre, who's never said anything about social justice in his life. with Snoop Dogg, who at the time never said anything about this kind of stuff either, right? When he's rapping with all these dudes, from Dog Pound all the way up, he's not rapping with cats. It's not like he's rapping with Chuck D. It's not like he's rapping with cats from X Clan or even Ice Cube. So I think that you kind of understand that some of his contradictions, I argue, are just a reflection of his humanity. We're all bound to, inextricably bound to human foibles. That's one thing. The other thing is that some of this, I think, is a consequence of artistic pressure from his peers over death row, as he slowly but surely became more like that character Bishop from the movie that he was in early on. And a lot of times people talked about how his own personal life seemed to blur into that character. And I think that friends who knew him say that, and a lot of other observers say that. I didn't know him, so I can't speak to any of that, but a number of folks have said that.
Right. And just to the listeners, the film you're talking about, Juice, right?
Yeah, Juice. Sorry.
Yeah, some people might not have watched Juice, so you need to watch Juice. Tupac, is definitely legendary from that perspective. And I get it. And to your point, Dr. Ogbar, his life is like all our lives, right? We all are flawed in some way. We all are walking contradictions to some extent, and we all are battling, this thing we call life from that perspective. So I guess a little bit talking a little bit about your article, and to those, I'll definitely on the social media channels share the article that Dr. Ogbar wrote on the conversation. What prompted you to want to put out the article, even though I know you're a huge fan? What just made you want to put out the article on the conversation?
So they actually contacted me to see if I was interested in writing an article to correspond with the release of the movie.
Oh, okay.
And I thought that was a great idea to put something together. So I jumped on it, and it was cool. They said, hey, you could do what you want to do. I threw out some ideas, and then they said, that one works. And I really want to look at Tupac as a sort of, to some ways, like a personification of his generation, of a slice of his generation. And, people born in the early 1970s, those people born after the Civil Rights Movement and raised after Black Power. So he's part of the very first generation of Americans born after the dismantling of white supremacy, the codified dismantling of white supremacy. So the very first generation in United States history. And what does this really mean when you kind of come of age at a point like post-Black Power, post-Civil Rights, and a certain level of Black consciousness, a certain level of access to America, if you will? While America still itself is not, fully free from its, investment in white supremacy, you do have greater access. But also, he's dealing with, a very unique personal life where you have a mother who's a Panther, but also she becomes a drug addict, right? And the war on drugs defines his generation in ways it doesn't define any generation in the history of the United States. And ultimately, by the time, Tupac is killed, and we think about the sort of violence and everything else, but, he was also part of a generation that they call black men endangered species, because so many were being killed and also engaging in killing and going to jail, right? So many ways, like Tupac was kind of part of and reflects these major concerns and ideas that we define a generation by. And, his life also, we use this term hip-hop generation. And ultimately, the article was, I had to delete that term because for length, the article, but the early draft of it, we talk about this generation, the demographers call the hip-hop generation. These people born that actually overlap with what we call the Generation X. So people born after baby boomers between 1964 and, say, 1980, 81 or so. But Tupac is part of this generation that I call the hip-hop generation. And anyway, that was it right there. So his life is, in some ways, demonstrative of a lot of major issues that we often study, including mass incarceration, including the war on drugs, including over-policing, including hip-hop and struggles with gender, with class, with race, and Tupac grappled with all those things.
Interesting. So Tupac died at what age again, Dr. Ogbar?
25 years old.
25 years old.
25
So
years old.
had not Tupac, ran into the, you had the whole East Coast, West Coast beef, right? Everything that's happening in the time, hip hop culture, etc. If Tupac lives, right? I guess, as we wind down the interview, if he lives to 30 or 40 years old, who do you think Tupac would have evolved into?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, no. That's yeah. So who do you think he would have evolved into,
Yeah.
and would that have potentially set the landscape of where hip hop is today? Would it be in a different sphere per se?
So it's an excellent question. We never have an answer to it. Quincy Jones said it best when he said that when we think of Tupac, we're looking at someone whose life was cut short at age 25. He said that if we took a snapshot of all of our lives, that most of us at age 25, what would we see? He said if we took a snapshot of Malcolm X at 25, we would have seen a guy who was a drug peddler, a former pimp, a burglar, someone who was so bad they called him Satan in prison, a guy with a perm in his head who chased white women.
Right.
That's what we'd have seen, right? That's what we'd have had if Malcolm Little's life stopped at 25. And he went on this whole thing. You can look at all these people. Like, imagine if all these guys' lives stopped at 25, or men and women, and we would find people who had profound impacts on the lives of millions that they didn't live long enough to realize those things that would have unfolded in their future. So with Tupac, we can say something similar. We don't know what kind of person he would have evolved into. I know that when we think about what he wanted to do, he wanted to leave Death Row Records. He wanted his own label called Euthanasia. He wanted to have greater artistic control over his own work. He wanted to venture into a lot of different things, and this comes up in the movie, but he wanted to have management. He wanted to do TV. He wanted to do movies. He wanted to do a lot. He wanted to build a business empire. And so in some respects, he wanted to do what ultimately you see people like Ice Cube do, with Sean Puffy Combs did, with stuff that Jay-Z wanted to do, like to build economic infrastructure that could simultaneously engage in music with his own sort of terms, and then also other multimedia. And this is what Tupac would have wanted to do. So it was done by other people. If Tupac would have done it, we don't know. And I think that Tupac's potential clearly was there. But again, this is left to our imaginations to consider.
Definitely. And the last two questions I have for you. One, you did see the movie, right?
Yeah.
So what was just your thoughts? If you're the professor, you've graded people for years, almost 20 years. Like, what movie? Old head for sure. What grade would you give the movie, and why?
I really want people to see the movie, and I don't want to taint. I'm not a. My lane is being a historian, not a movie critic, so I'm not gonna be that good. But I'll say this, man. I thought that Demetrius Shipp Jr. did an extraordinarily good job playing Tupac. I thought that there were times when he mastered his mannerisms, his inflections, his speech, the look, and there are certain camera angles where a dude looked like Tupac, and I think that he did a very good job. He's a new actor, so obviously he's not going to be Denzel or De Niro. He's not going to be masterful in the way that we might expect. I love Tawny Newton, for example. That is a superb actor, and she does great work all the time. So obviously he's not going to be seasoned like those people, but he did as a first-time actor. I think he did an excellent job. I think the movie itself could be I would probably give it a B minus. In some ways, it was I would say like a bullet point movie with his life, and it could have done a much better job with a sort of organic telling. I waited for the moment when the Tupac character would have a moment where he grappled with the gravity of his life and give him some time to sort of muddle in the intersection of all the things that had affected his life. And I was kind of waiting for those moments when you get a chance to see the director pull the best out of the actor, but also it would add a lot to the movie simultaneously by showing some depth and some complexity. And it was always right there, like it was just about to come out, and then they walked away from those moments when those opportunities emerged. And that's what I found kind of disappointing. That I was kind of waiting for those sort of grand moments of suffusive emotional expression, and I just never found those in the movie. But I found it entertaining. And overall, I would probably give it a B minus.
Got you. And then the last question I have for you, because I know you're a busy man. Just to the listeners out there, the last kind of words for Tupac, being that the movie is out and people are reliving, his legacy, etc. On OD right now, and rightfully so. What would you just tell to the people who want to go see the movie or who want to now become historians of Pac's life? Just what last words of advice or last words of your perspective you would share with the people?
Yeah, I think that people should see the movie. Also, there are a number of books written of Tupac. I can't say that I'm familiar with the best ones. I suspect people can Google, check them out. Definitely reading the kind of the work that has been done on Tupac, the biographies, and other books on hip hop in general. I think would be fun and enjoyable. And to understand that Tupac himself was a consequence of a deep social and political environment that I think produced the kind of person that grapple with the contradictions of the drug trade on all sides, right? How destructive it was to black people, the violence it was that it created. Again, I can't overstate the power of mass incarceration. This is a term that I've used a bit, but when you think about great human rights abuses happening in our midst, Tupac addressed these things in a number of songs. He talked about the inefficacy of mass incarceration. People that he said going to the state pen, coming out worse than they went in, right? And so the inability or at least unwillingness of prisons to actually reform people, but simply to punish people. But again, they're very selective about punishing. In the case of Castile, Philando Castile, who was just acquitted. I mean, here's a guy, the murderer of Castile. Here's a guy who killed a man, live TV, and, the guy had no gun put on him. Police officers can literally kill with impunity, right? And there are people who are in prison for years for selling weed. You know what I'm saying?
Right, right.
So this is the kind of stuff, these contradictions Tupac addressed, 20 years ago. And these are things that we're still grappling with now. And so I think that there's a lot that when we talk about Tupac, a lot of times we reduce him to, thug life chat on his chest. But we also think about how he tried to reimagine what thug life can mean. The hate you give little infants fucks fucks everyone. Excuse me for cursing, sorry. But F's everyone.
Right.
But even Tupac, tried to infuse some of these words like, the N-word,
So, well, Dr. Ogbar, I definitely appreciate you for coming in studio. And, to the listeners, I told you it was going to be a good one. And, this is what it is. To live the life of Tupac, you got to understand, that we all are multi-leveled individuals who have, different layers, different complexities, different parts of the world and times that we all are trying to figure out our social identity and make meaning of the world, and as we continue to make meaning within our own world, just know that, sometimes we got to take the judgmental aspect of it and just really be open to multiple perspectives, to the knowledge, right? Understanding history, understanding these things that are plaguing us in whatever form or fashion, to ultimately to respect individuals, like the Tupacs, and his life and his music and everything that he did. So I definitely want to thank Dr. Ogbar for dropping jewels as he always does. And, to the listeners, thanks for listening. And we're going to continue to rock out every week. We got more exciting call-ins and guests that's going to be coming through studio, so stay tuned. The show is only going to continue to get better. But for the Motivational Jumpstart, this is Mike Mallory. Follow me on social media at imsoeducated, on Instagram, Snapchat, you name it. And we're just going to continue to change the culture and continue to be the change that you wish to see, people. All right, for the Motivational Jumpstart, we are out.